Chapter 67. This Venerable One's Heartfelt Anguish. The city god temple stood at the very edge of Chu Xun's range of power. His barrier reached the stairs of the temple, but no farther. Inside the temple, candles flickered weakly. A dozen ghosts who had cultivated corporeal forms lined either side. Between the lines was a woman in red, tied up and facing away from them, her head tilted back as she gazed up at the statue on the altar. Next to her stood Shao Man, his eyes downcast as he held firmly onto a young child. "Lanne!" Chu Xun cried out. The child was none other than Chu Xun's son, Chu Lan. Moran's heart lurched at the sight of the kid in trouble. He could still taste the pastry on his tongue. He made to go over, but was blocked by Chuaning. "Don't." "Why not?" Chuaning glanced at him. "Every one of them is already 200 years dead," he said quietly. "But this illusion has been manifested. I don't want you to get hurt." Moran fell silent. It was the truth. No matter what he did now, the dead were already gone, and there was no way to change that. The boy wailed from outside the barrier, nearly unintelligible. "Papa, Papa, help me! Papa, please help Lanne!" Chu Xun's lips quivered. "What are you doing?" he yelled at Shao Man. "I've never done you wrong. Let him go." Shao Man ignored him, head lowered as if he had heard none of it. However, the hands clutching Chu Lan betrayed his inner hesitation. There was a mole between the thumb and forefinger of his left hand, and his hands trembled without stop, the veins on their backs starkly visible. By now, everyone taking refuge at the governor's residence had arrived as well. They murmured to one another, aghast and furious at the sight within the temple. "That's the Gong's son. How could this happen?" In a single motion, Shao Man cut the ropes binding the red-robed woman. She seemed to come back to her senses and turned slowly around. She was beautiful, pure as a lotus flower, her neck long and elegant, but her face was paper pale, and her lips were tinted red as blood. The smile she directed at Chu Xun was more terrifying than it was lovely. The low light of the candles illuminated her face. The moment Chu Xun saw her, he froze, as did the people old enough to recognize her. There was sadness in her smile. Softly, she said, "Husband." Moran's expression was pure shock. Chuaning watched on silently. The woman was none other than Chu Xun's deceased wife. Madame Chu looked to her side and lashed out her arm to take her son from Shao Man. Though Shao Man was unwilling, Madame Chu was a ghost and much stronger than he was, now that she had been freed from her bindings. She easily pulled the child from his grasp. However, the madame had died of illness before her child was even a month old, so the boy had never seen his mother. He kept crying for his father to save him. "Be a good boy and don't cry anymore. Mama will take you to your papa." Madame Chu hefted the child in her delicate arms and slowly walked out of the temple, down the rain-soaked stone steps, to the edge of the Changqing barrier. She stood facing Chu Xun, her joy mixed with sorrow. "My husband, it's been a long time. Have you been well?" Chu Xun couldn't speak. The tips of his fingers shook uncontrollably at his sides as those phoenix eyes stared at the woman behind the barrier, their rims slowly reddening. "Lanne has already grown so big," Madame Chu continued softly. "You've grown steadier too, a little different from the man I remember. Let me take a good look at you." She reached out and her hand pressed against the barrier. She couldn't cross it, not while her body was that of a ghost. She could only gaze quietly across the flowing colors of the barrier at the person on the other side. Chu Xun's eyes slid closed, wetness clinging to his lashes. He pressed his hand to hers, separated by the barrier. Then his eyes opened. The pair gazed at each other, across life and death, just as in days before. Chu Xun choked back a sob. My wife. Where the family had been separated by life and death for many years, the time they had spent together had been pitifully meager. The haitang tree I planted in the courtyard that year, did it take root? She asked. Chu Xun smiled with watery eyes. It's grown tall and beautiful. I'm glad, said Madame Chu, smiling gently. Chu Xun tried his best to keep smiling as well. Lander loves that haitang tree. He's always playing under it in the spring. He likes haitang flowers, just like you. Every year during Qingming. Unable to keep up the act any longer, Chu Xun pressed his forehead against the barrier, tears falling without stop as his voice broke. Every year during Qingming, he always picks the prettiest flower to place before your grave. Wonder, did you see? Every year, did you see? He was racked with sobs by the end, every word bleeding misery, until his composure finally fell apart altogether. Madame Chu's eyes also grew red. She was a ghost and had no tears to shed, but her miserable expression was no less unsettling to the onlookers. For a moment all were silent, everyone wordlessly watching the scene before them. Someone wept quietly. Then a cold voice rang out from above. Of course she knows, but not for long. Moran's face instantly changed. It's the Ghost King. Chu Wanning's expression grew dark as well. This coward won't even show himself. Shameless. The Ghost King's laugh sounded like nails against metal and made their blood run cold. Lin Wanner is one of our numbers now. I didn't want to hurt her, but since you're so set on opposing me, and even ruined one of my eyes, I'll just have to dig out your heart to inflict worse pain on you. At these words, the ghosts in the temples began chanting incantations. The heart is no more, let the past be erased. Madame Chu's eyes shot wide open and her voice shook. My husband, Lanner, take Lanner. The heart is no more, let connections be severed. Lanner, quickly, go to your papa. Madame Chu tried to push her child across the barrier, but the thin layer of light kept him out as if he too was a ghost. Chao Man looked down at them from where he stood by the railing of the temple. His face, originally charming, twisted with a mixture of sorrow and glee. It's useless. I put a ghost mark on him, as the Ghost King instructed. He's just like you now. The barrier won't let him in. Behind them, the incantation rose like a tide. The heart is no more, let reason be shattered. Husband! Madame Chu was already panicked, beyond measure, clutching her child to her breast and banging on the barrier. Husband, take the barrier down! Take it down and let Runner in! You have to protect him! You have to protect him! I'm almost... The heart is no more, let compassion be smothered. Husband! Madame Chu fell to her knees, her eyes wide as her whole body shook uncontrollably. Curse marks, the color of blood, slowly climbed up her face. Our child, Lanner, you promised me that you'd take care of him. Take it down, please, I'm begging you. Take it down, husband. Chu Xun felt as if his insides were being ripped apart. Again and again, his hand lifted to dispel the barrier, only to fall back down. Outside the barrier, Chu Lan bawled loudly, staring up at him with a tear-stained face, his little hands reaching. Papa doesn't want Lanner anymore. Lanner wants Papa. Papa, hold me. Madame Chu held her child tightly in her arms, kissing his cheek. The pair of mother and son, one kneeling, one crying, begged Chu Xun to take down the Changqing barrier and let the child in. Suddenly, someone in the crowd cried out, Gongzi, you can't! You can't drop the barrier! You would doom the hundreds of people left in Lin'an. That's their ploy. Gongzi, you can't drop the barrier! That's right! The barrier must be kept up! The common people's desire to live made them kneel one after another and grovel before Chu Xun, pleading, "Gongzi, please, you can't take down the barrier or everyone will die." "Madam, please." One of them knelt and bowed before Madame Chu. "Madam, please have mercy. Please be benevolent. We will be grateful to you forever. Just please don't make the Gongzi take down the barrier. You were always so compassionate. Please, we're begging you." In an instant, other than the guards and a handful of others, everyone was on their knees, begging and crying, their voices drowning out those of Madame Chu and her son outside the barrier. Chu Xun felt like he was standing on the point of a needle while being stabbed by thousands upon thousands of sharp knives. Each blade grew barbs within his flesh and tore through his organs. Before him were his wife and son, and behind him were the lives of hundreds. Thus tormented, he felt as if he had already died, as if he had been swallowed by flames and burned to ashes. Nevertheless, the chanting continued, even more piercing than before. "The heart is no more, let emotion be expunged. The heart is no more, let desire be dissipated." More and more curse marks climbed up Madame Chu's fair neck, nearly covering her face, and they began to bleed into her eyes. She could hardly speak anymore and only stared at her husband in despair as she strained to utter, "If you, I will hate you. Take Lanner. I... The curse marks oozed into her pupils. Her body shuddered as if in agony, and she squeezed her eyes shut. "I hate you!" A wretched scream tore through the air, but by the end it turned into a bestial cry. Madame Chu's eyes flew open. Her gentle, almond-shaped eyes were stained the color of blood, and the whites of her sclera had disappeared, for there were now 4 pupils in each eye. "Wanner!" Chu Xun cried out with boundless sorrow, forgetting for a moment that the Changqing barrier required its caster to remain inside, wanting only to be with his wife. Just as he was about to step out of the barrier, an arrow pierced the sky and landed firmly in his shoulder. The arm he had raised dropped back down to his side. It was a young man of the guard, still posed with bow in hand. "Gongzi, wake up!" he self-righteously said to Chu Xun. "You've always taught us that the righteous put the people before the self. Were those just pretty words? Will you throw away the lives of hundreds to save one person the moment your own interests are at stake?" "Put that bow down," an old woman next to the young man said shakily. "How could you hurt the Gongzi? Everything is the Gongzi's choice. Gongzi has already done his utmost. How could you? How could you be so ungrateful?" As they argued, fearful cries broke out at the fore. Madame Chu had entirely transformed. Only a moment ago she had held her child with such love, but now she was no different from a beast. She howled toward the sky, with saliva dripping from her mouth, her teeth growing longer by the second. In her arms, Chu Lan's voice had gone hoarse from crying, but in between sobs he still called out, "Mama!" What answered him were Madame Chu's blood-red claws, which pierced through his throat. All sound disappeared from the world. Droplets of blood drifted through the air like so many blossoms. It was just like that moment years ago when Madame Chu had stood by the window, holding her newborn child, as she watched the petals of newly bloomed haitang flowers dancing in the courtyard. She had cradled the child gently in her arms as she sang softly, "Red haitang, yellow haitang, floating gently in the wind. Children in a land far away, missing their mom and dad." Red haitang, yellow haitang. The hand that had caressed Chu Lan so tenderly that year tore into his skull, his limbs, his flesh. Floating gently in the wind. The rain came down in a deluge, blood pooling and flowing around the ground. The mother devoured her child's entrails. Children in a land far away. The eaves of the city god temple towered solemnly above. The year Chu Xun was born, his mother had knelt before this temple and clasped her warm, delicate hands in prayer. The chime of a clock had scattered the birds nearby, and in the haze of the fragrant candles, she had bowed low to pray for her child's health and happiness, that he might live a long life, free from worries. Missing their mom and dad, Chu Xun's heart was torn from his mangled body. Madame Chu sank her teeth into it, insatiable, blood dripping from the corners of her mouth. Ah! Chu Xun broke. He clutched his head where he had fallen to his knees and bashed his skull repeatedly against the ground. He wept, wretched and miserable, kneeling in the rain and the blood in front of his wife and son, in front of all the people of Lin'an. He knelt before the image of divinity, and he knelt in the mud underfoot. He knelt in the depths of sin, and he knelt in the heights of virtue. He knelt in untold gratitude, and he knelt in utmost hatred. He hunched over in the dust, his very soul torn apart and extinguished, disintegrated into dust. A long while passed before the people finally spoke in quavering voices. Gongse, Gongse, condolences. Gongse's benevolence will not be forgotten. Chu Gongse is righteous, truly a kind person, truly a kind person. Someone had pulled their own child close and covered his eyes so that he wouldn't see the bloody scene. They only now let go to say to Chu Xun, Gongse, you saved all our lives. The madam and the little Gongse, they'll surely ascend to paradise. Take your child and get lost, someone else spat. Why didn't you and your child go to paradise instead? The parent backed timidly away. It all seemed so distant. Chu Xun felt like he had already died. The voices sounded as if they came from across an ocean, from across a life. In the torrential downpour, a man was covered in mud, and a thin layer of transparent light separated him from his wife and son, the dead on one side, the dying on the other. When Moran looked at this scene, he suddenly thought of his past life, in which he had wantonly slaughtered the innocent. He wondered if he had created more than one Chu Xun, more than one Chu Xun, more than one Madame Chu. He looked down at his hands. For a split second, they seemed to be covered in blood. Then he blinked, and it was only the ice-cold rain gathering in his palms and flowing down his hands. He trembled. In the next moment, a warm hand took his. Moran snapped out of it as if he were waking from a nightmare and found his little Shidi gazing up at him with concern. He looked so much like Chu Xun. Moran slowly knelt down to eye level with his Shidi, like a sinner begging for forgiveness from the souls of the dead, and stared at him with eyes welling from both rain and tears. Chuaning said nothing, only reached up and patted him on the head. It's already happened, he said softly. It's all in the past. You're right. A while passed before Moran wrangled out a sad smile. Lowering his lashes, he murmured, It's all in the past. However, even if it was all in the past, he had still done all those things. He hadn't killed Chu Xun, but how many people just like Chu Xun had died because of him? The more Moran thought about it, the more scared he became, and the more it hurt. Why had he been so cruel? Why had he been so unrelenting?